movement in its first phase 1930-31 was the most powerful movement which was launched by the Congress in terms of those who were sent to prison, in terms of repression, in terms of mass mobilization. And therefore it is important to examine why it took place, what developments led to the civil disobedience movement, what were its strengths and what were its weaknesses. Both are important. Now, one very important feature in late 1920s was the development of radical trends in the national movement. Some trends were already apparent. For instance, in 1924 at Kanpur, the Communist Party of India was openly formed. Although there had been conspiracy cases before, and there would be a Kanpur conspiracy case later, and then there was the famous Meerut conspiracy case of 1929, in which 31 communists were arrested, leaders, and Muzaffar Ahmad and others received life imprisonment and very long imprisonments, which were later reduced, but these conspiracy trials, the Peshawar conspiracy case, Kanpur conspiracy case, Meerut conspiracy case, showed that there was a growing communist movement among the workers. Then there were socialist trends among the ranks of revolutionary terrorists. As I explained yesterday, this was the name given by the revolutionary terrorists to themselves. Terrorist was not a bad name, actually. Terrorist was the name given to Russian opponents of the Tsarist regime, particularly nihilists who were greatly admired by them. What change came over these violent groups was that instead of looking at Hindu nationalism, as had been the case after the partition of Bengal, they now shifted to socialism. Both Surya Sen, who led the Chittagong conspiracy case, and also Bhagat Singh and Chandrasekhar Azad proclaimed themselves socialists. And Bhagat Singh's party was called the Republican Socialist Army. So these radical trends were already there in 1920s, but two particular figures were particularly notable. One was Subhas Bose, who had left Indian civil service to join the non-cooperation movement. He was a lieutenant of CR, but found the Swaraj party too moderate for his taste and was so radical that he was actually put into prison and exiled to Mandalay in Burma. Ultimately, he was released in 1928, and he then became one of the foremost radical leaders of the Congress. Radical in two senses. Firstly, radical in the sense that he demanded total independence from Britain. And secondly, that he was radical in the sense that he proclaimed himself a socialist. But the most important figure was Jawaharlal Nehru. I have already previously, when we were considering the development of the Congress after 1914, we took Gandhiji as the leading figure. Jawaharlal Nehru did not replace him, but certainly alongside Gandhi became the major figure in the national movement from around 1929 onwards. He had taken part, his father was Motilal Nehru, He had taken part in the non-cooperation movement along with his father. But he had not been satisfied either with the withdrawal of the non-cooperation movement in the manner it came about, nor with the Swarajists, his father's party. And therefore he went abroad for some time. Then he returned. He also revisited Bolshevik Russia. Then he returned and in fact became the most well-known radical leader from 1927 onwards. Like Subhas Bose, he was in favor of demand for total independence, not even just simply Swaraj, but total independence. And secondly, he wanted that India should be a socialist country, so that one should strive for socialism. He also criticized Gandhiji's vision of India as a village India. He wanted India to be an industrialized country, but not under capitalism, but under socialism, under people's control without capitalists and landlords. His famous article, which if you get anywhere will be worth reading for you, that is Tomorrow in India, where he attacks Vallabhbhai Patel, who had in paper laid out Gandhiji's vision for India, but Nehru there strongly criticized it. He didn't directly criticize Gandhiji, but he criticized Vallabhbhai Patel's paper, vision of a village India. And he said that the major fault in modern civilization was not modern civilization, but capital. His later works, two major works, put forth his ideas very well, Glimpses of World History. They are both prison works written in prison. Glimpses of World History was written in 1930-33. And then perhaps the most splendid work of his autobiography, written in 1934-35, again in prison. The autobiography is not really his autobiography, but his memoirs of the national movement, in which he enters here and there, but this is generally what he thought of the national movement. Autobiography constitutes a very important source for us also, because it is a very frank discussion. And while he expresses that admiration of Gandhiji, there are also very strong criticisms of his dictatorial bent, of his capacity to satisfy every class, howsoever wrong the interest, for instance, landlords. He could appeal, he could go to the peasants and also to the landlords. So Nehru rejected this policy of being good to everyone. Therefore, it's a very frank book. It's also frank in other matters. Unlike Gandhi, Gandhiji was very deeply religious, and although he believed that all religions should be respected, and he did not hold back from criticizing religions. For instance, his criticism of Arya Samaj was extremely bitter. He said that they didn't understand Islam, so they should not attack it. But he also called himself Sanatani Hindu. Nehru on religious matters was totally frank. He did not believe in God, he did not believe in afterlife. He did not, and he pronounced it openly. And he considered, certainly in Glimpses of World History, India's old civilization as irrelevant for the present. This was a position which he gave up in his later work, Discovery of India, and that is an important difference. But remember that In 1930s, nobody would know that he would change his opinion in discovery of India. At that time, his total rejection of the evils of Indian civilization, notably in glimpses of world history, made a deep impression on the Indian people. It seemed therefore that Nehru was offering an alternative platform for the national group. A platform totally secular, a platform totally rationalistic, a platform oriented towards absolute anti-imperialism, no compromise with imperialism, and tending towards socialism. This combination of Gandhiji and Jawaharlal Nehru was therefore of great importance in the civil disobedience movement. Simultaneously, they could appeal to two different constituencies. The traditional Gandhi was appealing to both the traditional constituency and the poorest of the poor constituency. Nehru was appealing more to organized working class, to organized peasant movement, to educated youth, and so on. But both these constituencies were extremely important. And one of the important decisions of Gandhi, which very few people have been able to explain, the decision of genius, was to turn to Nehru in 1929 and make him president of the Congress, and then to practically declare him to be his major leader by his side and his successor. This decision in 1929 has been very hard to explain, because up till then he was always squabbling with Nehru. In 1927, Nehru and Bose got the Madras Congress session passed a resolution for total independence despite Gandhi's opposition and position war. Similarly, in the Calcutta Congress of 1928, the Nehru and his supporters, along with Subhas Bose, opposed the all parties report and resolution, and I will just explain why they opposed it. While Gandhi was for their total acceptance. In fact, Gandhi wanted the agitation to be in favor of all India party's report rather than in favor of independence. So despite these differences, which often led to bitterness, Gandhi suddenly decided that Nehru would be the next man in the Congress. People thought that Vallabhbhai Patel would have such position or C. Rajagopalachari, but Gandhi suddenly made it clear. This was characteristic of Gandhiji in many ways, perhaps a result of some eccentricity, one doesn't know, because his differences with Nehru continue. But it is important to remember that this decision combined two very major forces in the civil disobedience movement and gave it considerable strength. Now, here I would like to come to the issue of Motilal Nehru Committee, because it had two aspects. One was how much political independence should be demanded, and the other one was the communal problem. Now, when the parties, most political parties in India opposed the Simon Commission, then the natural question arose, what have you as an alternative? So they formed an all-parties committee, in which there were representatives of Congress, Muslim League, Hindu Mahasabha, Liberal Federation, and so on. Motilal Nehru was the major draftsman, and he drafted the all parties report. Now there were two major difficulties. One was the question of the content of Swaraj, home rule. The Nehru committee asked for dominion status only. Governor General would continue. Not for republic, but dominion status. And in this dominion, they were prepared to concede the control of the armed forces and policy to the Governor General, that is to the British government. Two very important areas which always belonged to the independent power were to be retained by Britain, the army and the foreign policy, because they would be directly under the control of Governor General, and the Governor General would be appointed by Britain. So whether this could be acceptable, this was the first question. It was acceptable to Gandhi because Gandhi was always in favor of the moderate demands, and then take this moderate demand and go to the extremes in mobilization and win those moderate demands. We always thought that one should demand what could be conceded. The second element, but of course this was unacceptable to the radical elements in the Congress. The second element was the communal question. The all parties committee report accepted the fact of communal representation, but not separate communal electorates. That is to say, certain seats would be reserved for Muslims, but the voters would be both Hindus and Muslims. Mostly in the provinces of Bengal and Punjab it did not matter, because the Nehru committee had demanded mass suffrage, adult suffrage for the first time. This was a radical step. All men and women who were adults would have the right to vote. So naturally, if in the Muslim majority areas, what was the point of reservation? If Muslims wanted only to elect Muslims, they could get them. It was in the minority provinces, where Muslims were in minorities, that the major issue came up. How many seats Muslims will have? Now these were thrashed out, but in the center the disputes remained. Remember, there was no dispute over the abolition of separate electorate. There was the dispute of how many Muslims will be in the central assembly. The Nehru report granted 28%. Muhammad Ali Jinnah wanted 33.3%, one-third. That was above the Muslim population. That was a very minor point, very marginal. But this was one of the 5 demands. Then one other demand was that the provinces should have residual powers. They should have near autonomy, whereas the Congress wanted a strong center and the power to belong, residual powers to belong to the center. Residual means those powers which are not provided for in the Constitution or in the Constitutional Act. Then the separation of Sindh from Bombay Presidency. Now here unfortunately, the all parties report was delayed until almost the opening of the Congress. There remained hardly the time to consider anything. Hindu Mahasabha made a point of saying that once the Muslim League representative had signed the Motilal Nehru report, Mr. Jinnah had no right to reopen it, and of course then they would come for their demands that everything should be according to population and not according to what Muslims wanted. And so unfortunately all these things were shelved and no concession was given on these 5 points, which meant, as Birkenhead had predicted that Jinnah would be left high and dry, because Birkenhead thought that Jinnah would demand a number of concessions for Muslims with the national with the Congress and other parties would not concede. But actually his demands were not very very difficult to concede at that time. When they were 5, they were not 14 as they later became. And if at least 2 or 3 had been conceded, there would have been enough room for compromise. Unfortunately, that opportunity was missed, and the report was placed before the Congress, Calcutta Congress, in late December 1928. Now, in the Congress, the major issue was not the communal one, but the political one. Dominion status, and that also with limited powers. It became clear that the majority of the Congress delegates were not with Gandhi in starting a movement for the status, dominion status, that did not appeal radical enough to people to be called for to offer sacrifices. What the majority wanted was a demand for total independence. And therefore a compromise was put into effect that the all parties report was accepted if the British government accepted it in a year. Otherwise, the Congress will start non-cooperation after 1929 was over, after the end of 1929, and at the end of 1929 the Congress would meet at Lahore, and then non-cooperation would be started. Since small events take a lot of time, I will not go into details on what happened during 1930. There was all the attempt on the part of Gandhi to a two-pronged attempt. On one side, he went on organizing, he toured the country, he strengthened his village organizations. On the other hand, he tried to achieve a compromise with the British government. And this led to one statement by the British government, which later on proved to be a tactic which got the Congress on the wrong foot, so to speak. Irwin announced that they would not wait, in effect he announced that they would not wait for Simon Commission. They would start discussions. It was in October 1929. They would start discussions with the Congress and other parties in a round table with a view to clearing the path for India becoming a dominion. After all parties report wanted dominion status. After all, Congress had previously demanded a round table conference. So Irwin was saying that these two demands we are going to concede. Dominion status will be our object, and you wanted round table conference, we are doing it, but we are not going to accept the all parties reform, adult suffrage and full dominion just now with only 2 powers left to the Governor General. That we are not going to accept. Let other parties, all parties, including the British government, in a round table conference agree to some constitutional development. Now Gandhi immediately compelled the working committee members to welcome the statement. Subhas Bose refused to sign and resigned. Nehru says against his will he signed. Already Nehru was now paying the price of compromise or the coalition which had been imposed by Gandhi and him. But the difficulty was that this concession was not acceptable to the British conservatives and liberals. And they made such a noise in the British Parliament that the British government there said, we don't intend to give dominion status to India. We don't intend to have any decision before the Simon Commission gives its report. And what Irwin's statement represented was simply a repetition of our previous commitments. No new promise was given. So that took away took away any chance of any agreement on this. So Gandhi also gave up negotiations because if the British government had said that they had nothing new to offer through Irwin's statement, then what was the point in negotiating? And so the preparations began for the civil disobedience. Now, at Lahore, an attempt was made also to win over Muslims and Sikhs. Gandhi and Nehru both said that since the all parties report had been rejected, we are prepared for a new settlement of the communal question. And it is fair to say that they said it. They practically offered all the concessions on all the 5 points that Jinnah had previously made, but which have now gone to 14 points. But essentially what happened was that the Muslim League leadership now decided that they would like to get these concessions from the English British government and not the Congress. And therefore they accepted the invitation to the first roundtable conference, where henceforth now they put all their demands to the British government, refusing to negotiate with the Congress at all. This particular point is unfortunately not stressed in even the official history of the national movement by Tarachand, who blames the Congress leadership correctly for not accepting most of Jinnah's 5 points in 1928, but does not underline the fact that when actually the Congress only 1 year later said that the whole communal question is open to discussion and offered to accept at least the 5 points, then Muslim League refused. I think they didn't want to join the civil disobedience because the price of a communal settlement would have been joining the civil disobedience movement. So it was quite obvious why they refused. Now, the Lahore Congress was also memorable because Nehru here laid out the entire left program for the Congress. He acclaimed socialism. He said that while the Congress would fight for independence, it would also explain to the people what independent India would be like. This had never been done, and therefore his presidential address was particularly memorable on these 2 points. And then of course the decision was taken to start the civil disobedience movement. 26th January was to be the Independence Day. Now it is the Republic Day. So always remember that the names have changed. The Republic Day of today, when the Constitution came into effect, is the Independence Day proclaimed at the Lahore Congress. At that time, a pledge of independence was taken all over India, and then the movement for civil disobedience was to be started. Now, in the civil disobedience movement, as I have said, the joining of the 2 streams, the conservative, conservative in the sense that the rather moderate stream of Gandhi with his large mass of poor supporters, along with the radical elements supporting Nehru and Bose, and the communists and socialists. All these, the combination of these 2 elements gave particular strength to the civil disobedience movement. Women were for the first time, who were totally absent in the non-cooperation movement, were for the first time brought into the field. Muslim participation was below par, that is to say, hardly in proportion to their population from the beginning. And although it picked up later, the only area where it was really massive was the northwest frontier or the Pathan movement. There, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan had come into the picture, and I will say a few words for his movement because of its important role in the civil disobedience movement. Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan was one of the Muhajireen who left India for Afghanistan in 1919 because they did not want to live in a British-ruled country. But he was so disappointed with the condition in Afghanistan that he decided to return, and he decided to organize his people through education. He was deeply religious like Gandhi, but his religion was like Gandhi, a very liberal kind of religion. In 1924, when riots broke out in Kohat and Bannu, people suddenly learned that a number of Pathans, led by Abdul Ghaffar Khan, had arrived there to defend the Hindus. And so, for the first time, India learned that there was a Pathan movement which was among Muslims, but which made it a point to defend Hindus in the riots. Subsequently, Abdul Ghaffar Khan gave it the name of Khudai Khidmatgar, which means servants of God's creatures, or servants of humankind. So, Khudai Khidmatgar. They wore red shirts, therefore they were also known as red shirts. Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan attended the Calcutta session and then the Lahore session, and from that time onwards his organization became the major organization, the Congress organization of the North. The entire Congress organization was converted into the Khudai Khidmatgar organization. In other words, congressmen in NWFP were known as Khudai Khidmatgar, whether Muslims or Hindus. In the beginning, his relations were with Pandit Nehru. Pandit Nehru, in fact, wanted that Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan's organization should be incorporated into the Congress, or that is to say, the NWFP Congress should be handed over to him. But later on, he found great affinity with Gandhiji and became one of Gandhiji's major lieutenants. Now, so this was the only Muslim area which actually played a great part, as we shall see, in the civil disobedience. If you want to have statistics, the official statistics at one particular point mentioned that 29,000 prisoners were in jail. Of course, this was an underestimate. More than 100,000 went to jail in civil disobedience. But out of these 29,000, only 1,100 were Muslims. So the Muslim proportion was very small and almost all confined to the NWFP, mainly confined to NWFP. And women were 300. 300 seems very small number now, but for conservative India in 1930, it was a very large number. These were convicts, that is to say, women who had been convicted of offences. They were not just arrested to be released the same day, but they had been convicted of offences. Possibly, and the 100,000 that were arrested, the women exceeded 1,000 and Muslims exceeded 3,000. But even that is a very low figure. And so you can judge that Muslim participation, except in NWFP, was minimal, and that was an extremely unfortunate position. Even Congress leaders, Muslim leaders, remained aloof from the civil disobedience movement until very late, when actually the Peshawar incident, which I shall shortly mention, drove them to civil disobedience, and then Dr. Ansari, Rafi Ahmad Qutbai, Tasadduq Sherwani, one of the great Congress leaders whose base was Aligarh, they went to jail. Now let me give the high points of the civil disobedience, because you need to read them, otherwise it will take a long time. Gandhi showed his moderation by not starting the agitation for Swaraj. That mainly remained a slogan. His major list of demands was 11 points. He wanted British policies to be changed in 11 directions. Many of them were demands made by the Congress earlier, but the most important demand, which seemed to affect everyone, was the salt duty, the high price of salt because of the salt duty, the monopoly of salt by the British government. So actually, even out of these 11 points, it was the salt duty which he made central. In the salt satyagraha started with his famous Dandi march in Gujarat, in which he made, and he defied the law by making salt. The important thing in the Dandi march was that even village headmen who were government officials resigned their posts. And this was an unexpected event, that government officials would be resigning their posts. Then these resignations began to be general. This was followed by other agitations at salt manufactories, which were brutally suppressed. But the Peshawar incident of April 23 became a particular national event. Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan had made great preparations, and his supporters had made preparations for the satyagraha there, which was to begin with the picketing of liquor shops. Huge crowds gathered when they learned that Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan had been arrested. The British government had also previously brought English troops, and then Garhwali troops, because they were all Hindus, and then the Sikh regiment. It was expected that since it was a Muslim crowd, they could use the non-Muslim Indian regiments. On this crowd near Kabuli Gate, the British soldiers started firing, but the crowd did not disperse. So then they brought the Garhwali regiment. Now this regiment refused to fire. So this became a major national event. They were court-martialed, sentenced to life imprisonment. But what became clear was that the British could not rely on the army. They did not try the Sikh regiment because of the fear that they would do the same. The Sikh regiment also refused duty. So then they brought in British troops, and after about a week, Peshawar was subdued. About 250 people died in the firing on 23rd April. And it was this event which, as I said, made a vast difference to Muslim elements within the Congress. They didn't win over Muslim League or others, but the Muslim elements in the Congress, which had held aloof, now decided, they held a conference and decided to join the civil disobedience. In Sholapur, in May, the Sholapur textile workers went on strike and seized the city. And there again, martial law was declared as in Peshawar, and after a week, this was subdued. So in fact, these two incidents electrified the country. And ultimately, the no tax campaign began to be promoted. Congress leadership did not want to antagonize the zamindars, but things were going out of their hands, particularly out of the hands of Gandhiji and his more moderate supporters, because of the crisis, worldwide crisis. Prices had fallen throughout the world, and the peasants in India now were faced with a fall of about 33% in the agricultural prices, so they couldn't pay rents to the landlord. And a large number of lands which the zamindars later on had as their seal and khudkast was really created during 1930 when they seized lands of the peasants who could not pay the tax, particularly in UP and other areas. In Gujarat, British land tax could not be paid by peasants. Therefore, they began to join the land tax, the no tax campaign. And this assumed a very important force in UP, where Nehru particularly began to call for a no rent campaign against the zamindars. It became a zamindar peasant issue which Gandhi had avoided, if you remember, by pointing it out in 1922 by withdrawing the movement after Chaudichora. But this could no longer now be stayed. The British government replied by taking away the lands of the people who refused to pay taxes. Their lands were seized and sold. And you see, it was not only the British. When families learned their lands could be seized, they declared that the parents could declare that the son who had gone to prison had now been expelled from the family and from his inheritance. So that not only the British government but also families expelled the Congress people who went to prison, the Congress peasants, the peasants who went to, and the small landlords who went to prison. I was fortunate to know four such people in Aligarh who became communist leaders, and I knew of the fifth who remained a Congress leader, Malkhan Singh, who similarly had their land seized and or were expelled by their families from inheritance. So this was, civil disobedience was not like modern political parties sending their members to jail. It was really a great hardship and could destroy your life for all time. Ultimately, it seems that both sides became tired. For the first time after Garhwali soldiers, the British government learned that they could not trust the army. The difficulty with the Congress, as Nehru points out in the autobiography, was that its major corps, its central corps was tired out. They were all in prison. They had been thrown out of their families. They were, where would new recruits come for jail? And they could only come through a no-rent campaign, which Nehru was trying, and therefore he was immediately arrested and imprisoned for 6 months because the British government was afraid nothing of the no-rent campaign as a measure which will arouse the peasantry against the government. But Gandhi was also not very enthusiastic about the no-rent campaign because he did not want a clash with the landowners. His Sarvodaya ideology meant that every class should be compromised with. And therefore both sides were now in agreement that something should come. And so the Gandhi-Irwin agreement of 5th March 1931. It was published in the Government of India Gazette Extraordinary. As Churchill put it, it was like a warlike Mr. Gandhi forcing the British government to a ceasefire, to an armistice. The Congress suspended the non-cooperation, and the British government released all prisoners against whom criminal offences were not urged. Now, as these prisoners came out, they were received with tumultuous welcome. And so, although the agreement really didn't give much to the Congress, but because it was an agreement in which the Viceroy had signed with the Congress as an equal party, one side Viceroy, the other side Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, it was believed that there was this supreme recognition of the Congress as the major party in the country, which it was indeed. As far as the contents were concerned, they could be heavily criticized. They left out a large number of people. They left out Bhagat Singh and his comrades who were facing execution in the same month. They left out the communists accused at Meerut. They left out the salt duty and all of Gandhi's 11 points. Even on the seizure of lands would only be returned where they had not already been sold to others. And so very little land was actually returned. Congress was forced to agree to attend the second roundtable conference, the first roundtable conference having failed to achieve agreement among the parties. This was being held in London, and Gandhi would go to London. The execution of Bhagat Singh took place, which particularly cast a shadow in the Gandhi agreement, he and his colleagues. Gandhi had tried his best to get a reprieve for Bhagat Singh and his comrades, but he had failed. That's true because Irfan later on conceded that Gandhi again and again came back and said, I appeal to your humanity to not to execute Bhagat Singh, but Irfan. When the Congress met at Karachi at the end of March, it was in a difficult position. It had to explain what had happened. The initial air of triumph had dissipated with the execution of Bhagat Singh. In any case, people wanted what Congress was now striving for. And therefore, the Fundamental Rights Resolution, or the so-called Karachi Resolution of 1931, is so important. The Karachi Resolution set out a vision of India on which Gandhi and Nehru basically agreed, but Gandhi made all the concessions. He agreed that in India, and of course on this there was total agreement, men and women will have equal rights, minorities will be protected, their language, that of course implied Urdu, will be protected, the state will observe neutrality among religions, that is to say, it will have no concern with any particular religion. Its language was therefore stronger than the language of the Indian Constitution today. It had a large number of concessions for women workers, for industrial workers, and also land to the tiller, although that was a bit weak. Nevertheless, it was widely interpreted to justify the abolition of zamindari later, that it was a part of the Congress program. Otherwise, it basically said land to the tiller and but rent, modest rent to the small zamindars. So all zamindars were not to go, but in fact, the clause was interpreted as abolition of zamindar. Indebtedness was to be abolished. That is to say, all rural indebtedness to moneylenders, all their debts would be cancelled. So this was fairly radical measure, and when Nehru says it would be acceptable to any capitalist country, actually he was exaggerating, because in this document it was said that the basic industry would be owned and controlled by the state, all basic industries. So this was not what any capitalist country would do. In any case, Nehru drafted it, Gandhi corrected it, then Gandhi moved it, and it thereafter became the programmatic document of the Congress movement in both their election manifestos of the 1936-37 elections and 46-47 elections. Congress, in fact, shaped its manifestos on the basis of the Karachi resolution. In the second phase, the second roundtable conference was not successful. Gandhi was isolated. The official history of Tarachand criticizes Gandhi's actions there, which if you like, you can read it there. It particularly criticized his willingness to sign documents with the Hindu Mahasabha, which he perhaps should have avoided. But since the second roundtable conference also failed, the civil disobedience was restarted in 1932, but this was very rapidly suppressed. In the meantime, in the third roundtable conference, which was held in the absence of Congress, the communal award was. This was very curious, that the Indian parties, apart from Congress, accepted all the political demands of the British government. You know, again, when many people defend the Muslim League position, I say, why did they accept the political demands of the British government? That the center will remain under their control, that the Indian princes and nobles will have, along with them, the British, they have the majority in the conservative forces will have the majority in the Central Assembly. All the basic things will remain with the Viceroy. Why did they accept it? I mean, it seems that they were interested only in the Hindu-Muslim question, not in the basic political question on which the first and second roundtable conferences had failed. Particularly the second roundtable conference. What was Britain conceding to India? What Hindus could concede to Muslims or vice versa was only a secondary issue. But the British actually won the day. The second roundtable conference came with a communal award. This was not joint electorate as had been accepted by Muslim League, but communal separate electorate. And separate electorate was also to be maintained for scheduled castes, so that Hindus were also to be divided into two communities. And it was on this that Gandhi went on his fast, which ultimately led to the Pune Pact in 1932, in which joint electorates were established for scheduled castes. Simultaneously, Gandhi began to organize Harijans. He renamed his journal Harijan and began to work very hard among the scheduled castes or villages. So that ultimately in 1940, in the next election, 1937, and then in the 46 elections, it was the scheduled caste vote went heavily to the Congress, not to Ambedkar. The denunciations of the Pune Pact, that it took away the Magna Carta from Dalits, is absurd, because actually the British maintained the entire control, so what Magna Carta would they have got if they had been there? And in any case, this division between the Congress and the Depressed Caste Federation of Ambedkar would have served British interests. They would not have served Indian interests at all. not the interests of Dalits. Actually, during the British period, Dalits had no concessions. There was no law against untouchability. They couldn't get water at the railway station. They were not getting any employment. There was no reservation in employment for Dalits at all. So, the condemnation of Pune Pact by critics seems to be highly exaggerated. Ultimately, the civil disobedience movement petered out, and in fact it was withdrawn, and the reconstruction and reorganization of the Congress began. I would like to now actually go rapidly over the synopsis because I've already taken an hour, and your patience must be limited. After the withdrawal of the civil disobedience movement, there was a next surge, what one would call reorganization of the national movement. There was a rapid growth of the left. The Congress Socialist Party was formed in 1934, in which communists and socialists cooperated. Kisan Sabha was formed in 1936, leading a very strong anti-zamindar agitation. And all the different trade unions, including communist trade unions, united in the All India Trade Union Congress in 1936, under the blessings of such leaders as Jawaharlal Nehru himself. In the meantime, as a consequence of the Third Roundtable Conference, the British Parliament passed the Government of India Act 1935, which did not concede anything as far as the central government was concerned, was the name. In fact, its central provisions never came into operation. So it's hardly worthwhile discussing the central provisions of the Government of India Act 1935. The Act of 1919 continued to determine the working of the central government, which means the central government remained purely British. Its basic concession was in the provincial governments, which was called provincial autonomy. The governor under the Act had absolute total rights. He could, in fact, overturn any decision of the provincial government. But every department of the provincial government, including home and finance and revenue, that is land relations and land tax, was now under ministers to be elected, to be responsible to be an elected provincial assembly. And therefore, the whole question was whether election should be fought. Remember that the voters were not according to mass suffrage. They amounted to 10% or a little more of the total electorate, of the total population, adult population. And so the electorate was limited. And therefore it was hoped by the British government that the expansion would bring in elements which are loyal to the government. As Churchill said that now voters will not be the educated middle classes but peasants and others, rich peasants and others, who regard the British government as their mother and father, my God. This was the expectation. But when the 1937 elections took place, they had surprising results. All the landlord parties except in the Punjab were wiped out. In UP, our previous Chancellor Nawab Sahib of Chatari headed a landowners party which lost practically every seat, both in Muslim and general constituency. And similarly in all other areas, the opponents to the Congress lost. Congress obtained majorities in Northwest Frontier Province, in UP, in Bihar, in Odisha, central provinces, it was over Madhya Pradesh, Bombay, which included Maharashtra and Gujarat, and the Madras Presidency. It obtained coalition governments in Assam and Sindh. In Punjab, the Unionist Party, which combined Muslims, Sikh and Hindu landlords, won the elections. In Bengal, the Krishak Praja Party of Fazlullah, who was himself a Muslim League leader but also a peasant leader, they obtained most seats and he became premier. These were called premiers, not chief ministers. Now, when these ministries took office, and there was a debate in the Congress whether they should take office or not, I'm not sure. They insisted that governors' discretionary power should not be exercised, otherwise they would resign. And to their honor, they made the release of Garhwali prisoners in UP the major issue. And when the governor refused, on this, Gandhi and Nehru and others were all agreed that the ministry would resign. But this would have been such a disaster for the Act of 1935 that ultimately the governor surrendered on the direction of the Viceroy. Viceroy issued a statement that normally the governor would not increase discretion, employ Garibi, and then the Maharashtra Trade Union Act, Bombay Trade Union Act, which was hostile to the trade unions. But otherwise, their administration worked fairly well. They resigned on the declaration of World War II, ostensibly for on the grounds that Britain declared war on Germany on behalf of India without consulting the provincial governments. But actually they resigned also because of the tensions within the Congress on the issue of Subhas Bose's residentship again at the Tripuri Congress in the central provinces where Gandhi had opposed his candidature, but Sitaramaiah, Gandhi's candidate, had been defeated. Thereafter, Congress was in disarray. The left, after supporting Subhas Bose, broke up, very unfortunately, into various factions again. And the result was that the Congress government's functioning was affected. Moreover, many congressmen were dissatisfied with their moderation and their failure to take radical steps. Although one must say that the restoration of civil liberties, the release of communists, the release of political prisoners, tenancy legislation and so on were fairly credited. Anyway, they resigned and thereafter they were in the wild, so to speak. There was a major agitation in 1940, the individual satyagraha, in which some 20,000 people went to jail, in which left also contributed some 3,000. So it was a major agitation which unfortunately hardly ever gets mentioned in the textbooks. The German attack on USSR, Soviet Russia in June 1941, and Japan's entry into war in December 1941 changed the situation. India was, it was not very clear whether Russia could stand up to Germany. The Battle of Stalingrad was raging in summer and autumn and winter, and nobody knew what the result would be. Here, Japan was at the frontier. They had occupied the area up till Assam, at the borders of Assam. So, Cripps mission came here in March, April 1942. and the negotiations failed because the Congress wanted immediate participation in government and transfer of power and not some future date, essentially. Muslim League was not satisfied with Muslim participation. And then came the Quit India resolution of August, which, as we know now, Nehru and Abul Kalam Azad opposed. Nehru confessed in his discovery of India that nationalism triumphed over internationalism, because you could see in the world that in August, Russia and China both were in peril. If Russia was defeated by Germany, nothing could stand between China, the total conquest of China by Japan. And if in such a situation one carried out an agitation against Britain, which was an ally of Russia and China at that time, then it was in effect helping the fascist powers. So this was quite clear, and Nehru's conscience was very greatly troubled. But Gandhi, now it is known, Gandhi said that if you don't want to support the Quit India resolution, you and Azad should leave the working committee. Things went to such a pass, and therefore they surrendered. The communists did not agree, they voted against and were subsequently expelled from the Congress for that. Now, Quit India resolution movement was quickly suppressed, because actually it had been left in the hands of Gandhiji to lead it, but Gandhiji was arrested. So no movement was in fact launched, and the government immediately launched arrests. The result was that from August 42 onwards to 1945, Congress was outside the political arena. Its newspapers were banned, its organizations were suppressed, and for instance, it had no Urdu paper during this period, whereas Muslim League freely operated and gained considerable support of the Muslims. This is the period where, you see, in 1936 elections, Muslim League showing was very unimpressive. They didn't even win a majority of Muslim seats in UP. But now they became totally triumphant. Here, since the last portion would be of some interest, I would take up both the issues of independence and partition. The Muslim League passed the Lahore resolution in 1940. It did not mention Pakistan. Pakistan was, however, already a name given by Chaudhry Rahmat Ali of Cambridge, and Iqbal had made fun of it. Chaudhry Rahmat Ali had named for practically every region of India. The present day Pakistan was Pakistan, of course, Punjab, Afghanistan, Kashmir, and Sindh, and the Stan of Balochistan. And that Bengal was Bang Islamistan. Bang means, of course, shout and cry. So Bengalis were supposed to be just shouters and cries. Bang Islamistan. Kerala was Moghlistan. Hyderabad state got to be Muslim because of the Usmania dynasty, so it was Usmania. I long possessed a pamphlet very well printed of Chaudhry Rahmat Ali with a map of India in which hardly anything would be left for Indians. Everything would be like this. I mean, Awadh would be green, and Aligarh would be green, this green spot, because perhaps of the Aligarh Muslim University. Now, Lahore resolution did not use this word. It also did not say that there would be one Muslim state. It said that areas where Muslims are in majority should be autonomous within India. And they would not demand, this is a particular point which makes Lahore resolution so iffy for present Pakistan regime. It said that it would not demand for Muslims in minority provinces meaning provinces where Muslims are in minority, but it would not concede to Hindus, to non-Muslims, in Muslim majority province. I don't know whether this has been ever considered in Pakistan from the very beginning after the first speech of Jinnah. Almost all constitutions actually reduce non-Muslims to subject rather than citizens. So, in fact, the Lahore resolution remained a dead letter as far as the second theatre was concerned. Now, much to Rahmat Ali's anger, Jinnah took over the name Pakistan sometime in 1941. And thereafter, because I was a student here, Pakistan Zindabad was a general slogan in the university. But when the Indian History Congress was held here in 1943, the Muslim League issued a notice that Pakistan Zindabad can't be shouted because guests are coming. You see, there was a culture at that time which now no longer exists. And so, the university students, instead of showing Pakistan Zindabad, used to shout History Congress Zindabad. They had to shout something. Anyway, you know, things were not so difficult at that time. Compromises could be made. In fact, no one took Pakistan seriously at that time, which was an immense mistake. The release of Congress leaders in 1945 took place after the end of the war in a situation where British imperialism was totally isolated. It had won the war against Germany, but Soviet Union had been the main power which had defeated Germany. The whole of Eastern Europe was outside the Western Bloc now. China was under revolution. Soon in 1949, the communist regime would be established there. There were rebellions in Malaya and Indonesia. And in England itself, there was war fatigue. And the Labour Party, during its elections in 1945, which it did not hope to win, everyone thought that Churchill would win, having won the war. But it won. But in its the manifesto, it had said that it would grant independence to India. Therefore, independence was now on the cards. And the INA agitation, the Indian National Army, Azad Hind Fauj agitation, and then the Royal Indian Navy mutiny of February 1946, in whose details I can't go because of lack of time, showed that Britain could not compete. It could not control the army, and it not get British soldiers. When the firing had been conducted in Calcutta and Bombay on Indian crowds in INA and Royal Indian Navy agitations, British troops were used. They could not risk using Indian troops because Indian troops would refuse to fire or may fire against on their own officers. So such was the position of the Indian army, so that it was hardly possible for England to go on. Major events also included the Telangana peasant uprising and the Quit Kashmir movement of 1947. They too were indicative of the unrest at the time. Now, it was here that the elections took place in 1946. The elections practically indicated what was there on the ground. In the general constituencies, which included the Muslim constituencies of Northwest Frontier Province, there the Muslim constituencies were known as general. There the Congress had immense majorities. The Muslim League outside Northwest Frontier Province won all Muslim seats to the National Legislative Assembly, and a very large number, or a very huge majority of seats in the Assembly, provincial Assembly, including all provinces outside the area that it was claiming for Pakistan. This is quite important because Muslim League in its manifesto had said plainly that its object was Pakistan. It did not hide it. It demanded partition, it demanded partition. And all Muslim voters voted for it. The only bright thing was not only what happened in NWFP, but also all over India, despite the fact that Congress supporters found it very difficult to vote because the Muslim votes were actually cast in different polling stations which were controlled by Muslim officers. Nevertheless, the Congress obtained, say in Aligarh city, 20% of the vote. Every fifth Muslim here voted for the Congress in very difficult situation. So clearly there was a group, a section among the Muslims, particularly the artisans, the peasants, who voted for the Congress. But bulk of the vote on the issue of Pakistan went to the Muslims. Now this must be remembered when you consider the further negotiations. Up till the elections, up till the Muslim League put Pakistan on its election manifesto, this could be negotiated. And in fact, there was the Bola Bhai Liaquat Ali Khan formula in 1945 in which Congress said that parity would be considered in the central government. If there were 10 ministries, 5 would go to Muslim League, 5 to the Congress. But soon after, Muslim League converted it into a Hindu-Muslim parity, which meant that Congress would not be able to appoint a Muslim minister. And this Congress refused to appoint. And then after 1946 elections, then the cabinet mission arrived and it had suggested 3 blocks in the country. I would not go into the cabinet mission plan because it never came to fruition. It assumed a united Indian government, but actually that would not have functioned because of the 3 major groups of provinces that it contemplated. And moreover, the princely states were outside its purview. Therefore, ultimately came to partition and Mountbatten Declaration of 33 June 1947. Mountbatten Declaration, in fact, enforced partition, although he communicated the decision of the British government to Congress, Muslim League and the Akali Dal in the previous to his declaration, but it was a decision. It was not open to consultation. If it was made clear that if any party did not accept it, then the 2 dominions that were to be created would be handed over to the civil servants of the dominion. England would be. It was followed by the India Independence Act of the British Parliament, where 2 dominions were created. Provision was made for their frontier determination, and that was the main controversial part. Paramountcy over the states was eliminated; it was not transferred, so that all states after 15 August technically became independent. It was inherent in the partition that in the period preceding Parliament that it would be accompanied by great slaughter and population movements. There were riots in Calcutta, Noakhali, Bihar, Western UP, Gurmeeteshwar, then Punjab, which included Haryana at that time. And particularly in Punjab, it was devastated. The important thing again was that you have to think about that it was only Gandhiji and his followers and communists and others who fought for peace in all areas, whether Muslims were the victims or Hindus were the victims. And I think that's a very important element of Gandhi's contribution to this nation. His hunger strikes, both in Calcutta and in Delhi, were directed to protecting Muslims. And if you look at anyone who went on hunger strike for protecting Hindus in Pakistan, you can ask me, there was only one man, Iftikharuddin, a Congress leader who had gone into Muslim League, who after Gandhiji went on hunger strike in Delhi, went on hunger strike in Lahore, and all credit to him. But this was also a very important feature of Gandhi's activity. When Gandhi in public meetings, he could not get Quran recited, he said no religious worship, no religious text could be recited. If Quran can't be recited, no other text. And this was the reason why he was assassinated. You perhaps know that although he was opposed to partition, he said that Pakistan was as much his country as India, and he was hoping to go to Pakistan to do the same thing which he had been doing for preventing riots in India. But he was shot down by God's force. His last fast was not only for protecting Muslims, but for paying 55 crores to Pakistan, which government of India had. He said that this was wrong and 55 crores should be paid to Pakistan. So his hunger strike was only over when RSS and other leaders gave him signed statements that they would not attack Muslims, and when the government announced that they were paying 50 crores, they withheld 5 crores, I don't know for what reason, to Pakistan. The characteristic reaction from Pakistan was that why did Mr. Gandhi withdraw his fast? Our 55 crores have not been paid, 5 crores are still due. So, but still, Gandhi's assassination stopped riots in the country. His hunger strike and his assassination. There's no question about it. This university is also saved because of that hunger strike. Because up till the Haryana border, all Muslims were being hooted, and there was a fear that there would be crossing across the river. In fact, in Khair, such slaughter had broken out. In Tappal, such slaughter had broken out. So, even this university owes much to that man. Well, I'll finish here. Tomorrow I'll complete complete the course of lectures by taking up the historiography of the national. Any questions?